Tommy, if you had to pick one classically all-American brand, you know, the brand that if you went to China or if you went to Europe or if you went to pretty much any place in the world, people would know, what brand would that be?
Well, it's got to be the toughest four-letter name on wheels.
Yep, that's right, Jeep. And today we're doing a very special list for all you Jeep fans out there, and it's the top 10 best Jeeps of all time.
This is the Sunrider for hardtop. This can be installed at your house by a professional.
I had a craftsman come to my house and install it, and if you want this done to your Wrangler, just go to besttop.com, order the Sunrider or other products, and they'll have a professional craftsman come to your house and install it in as little as a half hour, Nathan. How easy is that?
Yeah, and look at this. It's like a convertible. Boom, open, all in one.
Number 10, Tommy, is the Jeep Wagoneer or the Grand Wagoneer, the SJ. And when was it built and why is it important?
So throughout this list, we're going to give these funny little two-letter words. These are like the internal codes for all the Jeeps. So the Wagoneer, like you mentioned, is the SJ. It was a full-sized body-on-frame, we'll get to it in a second, but luxury-oriented SUV built from 1963 all the way up through 1991. It survived through 3 different owners of the Jeep brand, KAISER, AMC, and Chrysler. It's the longest production run of any Jeep product. The famous one's called the Grand Wagoneer, which is the one you think of from the 80s movies that's clad in wood on the side, and it's a successor to the old school WILLYS wagon that died in the early 1960s.
Yeah, and while Tommy gives you the facts, I'm going to give you the perspective. So why is it important, Tommy? In my mind, it's important because it's the first vehicle that introduced the luxury SUV to the world. Now, keep in mind that the Suburban has been around longer. That's the longest running American car nameplate, otherwise brand.
Right.
But the Grand Wagoneer took it to the next level. It became the luxury version of a 4x4.
Well, if you went back into the 60s and 70s, if you wanted a luxury vehicle, you got a sedan or a personal luxury coupe. And if you wanted an off-roader or a farm vehicle, you got an SUV. But what the Grand Wagoneer did is it combined these two worlds into something that we know today as the luxury SUV.
So number 9 on our list, I'm going to do the 2 letters first for all you Jeep fans, and then I'll tell you what it is. It's the YJ, perhaps one of the more infamous Jeep Wranglers out there because, well, it is the first Jeep Wrangler.
Yeah.
And why is it on this list?
A lot of people may not know out there, if you're not a Jeep person, that the old school 1950s, 60s, 70s, and even 80s Jeeps with the round headlights, those were never called Wranglers, those were called CJs, or civilian Jeeps. Well, starting in 1987, they went away from the CJ nameplate here in the US and went to the Wrangler nameplate, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. One of the most famous was actually a scandal that happened in the mid-1980s with 60 Minutes and the CJ5. They came out and said the CJ5 is too easy to flip over at low speeds. It pretty much destroyed the CJ5 in the US, and it kind of tarnished the Jeep name as being unsafe and easy to flip. First generation Wrangler was produced from 87 through 95. It had a 4.2, a 2.5, or the later models had a 4-liter inline straight-six engine. It was lower than the CJ, it was wider than the CJ, it had anti-roll bars, it had a wider track, wider leaf springs for additional stability. They really designed it to be an everyday driver Jeep, and why is that important?
How many do they produce?
Oh, so many. Over 680,000 were made.
Yep, and the reason it's important is because it has square headlights.
No.
No, that's not the reason it's important. It's important because basically took the vehicle from being a Aquarian, right? A farm implement, you know, bred on the farm, used on the ranch, and made it into a civilian, everyday kind of driving Jeep. I know the other ones are CJ, but nevertheless, Jeeps until the YJ were mainly used as off-roaders. This one made it wider, made it safer, made it more car-like, so people actually started using them as everyday vehicles as opposed to just pure off-roaders.
And the funny thing is people really hated the YJ, partly because of the square headlights, but it got a nickname for being a yuppie Jeep just for that reason, because it was built to be used every day. But here's the funny thing, they sold about as many Jeeps in that 12-year production run as they did of all the CJs that came 30 years before it.
And by the way, guys, at the end of this list, we're going to tell you which one of these 10 we would buy, so just keep that in mind. And we want to know which one you would buy. Number 8, Tommy, is the CJ8 otherwise known as the Jeep Scrambler. Why is that important?
Yeah, so the Scrambler was a long wheelbase version of the CJ7, except this one was a pickup truck. And it doesn't make a ton of sense when you really think about it, because it was not very practical. It didn't hold that much. It couldn't tow that much. The payload wasn't all that competitive. But the reason it's on our list is because it's just so gosh darn cool. This was such an incredible model. They only built them for a few years, and even in its best year, which was 1981, they only sold just over 8,000 of them. But it was a vehicle largely made famous by Ronald Reagan, because he famously had one on his farm. It represented the 80s, it represented America.
So why is it important? You know, all the other ones are kind of a high watermark or a turning point for Jeep. This one's important because it kind of represents the 80s, and it's just way cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a cool vehicle. There's nothing particularly noteworthy about it, but if you try to get one now, you're going to pay a lot of money, because Jeep enthusiasts just thought it was cool that they took a Wrangler and combined it with a pickup truck and put some really cool stickers on it. So yeah, really cool Jeep. Number 7, Tommy, is the LJ. And this is an important turning point because it foreshadowed something. In other words, it's the Jeep Wrangler Unlimited. So tell them about that Jeep.
Yeah, so remember how we mentioned that the YJ was more civilized? Well, the idea with the LJ is it'd be more usable even still. So it's based on the TJ Wrangler, which came out in '97. The LJ, or the Unlimited, actually came out in 2004. So it's a lengthened, essentially, TJ. Still 2 doors, which is important, but it's 15 inches longer than a standard TJ. It came out in 2005, also as a Rubicon model, so you could get it with the Dana 44s and all the off-road goodies. And it previewed something very important, which was to change the Wrangler forever.
Yeah, it previewed basically the 4-door Wrangler. In other words, the Unlimited or the long wheelbase Wrangler. And right now, if you want to get an LJ, it would probably cost you $10,000 more than the similar TJ that it's based on. They're highly sought after. People love the way they wheel, because they've got the longer wheelbase and they're really comfortable off-road. And once again, just like the Jeep Scrambler, they're really sought after.
Yeah, exactly. So the LJ Unlimited was longer, but still 2 doors. The next Jeep on our list, the Wrangler JK Unlimited, was now 4 doors longer still, and really brought the Wrangler into the modern era. So the Jeep Wrangler JK came out in 2007. They built it all the way up to 2018. They built over 1.6 million of the things. It was longer than the LJ, 2.4 inches longer, and the Unlimited, the 4-door version, was 20 inches longer than the standard model.
Yeah, and why it's important? Well, it's the best-selling Wrangler of all time.
Right.
Bar none.
And the funny thing is when they released the JK at the, I think it was a Detroit Auto Show in 2006, people lost it. They're like, the Jeep is no more, no one's gonna buy this Unlimited model, and the aftermarket producers were not even making parts for the 4-door because they thought no one would want it. And nowadays, if you look at the JL, something like what? Do you know the breakdown from 4-door to 2-door?
I do know the breakdown. It used to be 70-30, 70% 4-door, 30% 2-door. It's now gone as high as 90% 4-door. So unfortunately, the 2-door Jeep is going the way of the dodo. All right, let's keep going down our list. Number 5 on our list is the Jeep Grand Cherokee.
Yes.
That's the one that is the volume seller. That's the one that brought Jeep into the mainstream. So let's talk about it.
So they've built 4 generations of Grand Cherokee, starting with the ZJ, then the WJ, then the WK, then the WK2. You can still buy it. It's a unibody SUV, and it was kind of the spiritual successor to the Grand Wagoneer, but it changed the game in so many ways. Full unibody construction, slightly smaller than the Grand Wagoneer, but a lot better on road, a lot more usable every day, still retain the off-road chops, but now brought luxury into a more refined era.
Yeah, it's like if you want a Wrangler, but you don't want to put up with any of the compromises, you know, the flat windscreen, the loud wind noise, the loud tires. You know, the fact that a Wrangler is still basically built to be the most off-road worthy vehicle that Jeep makes. You can get yourself a Grand Cherokee and get most of that Jeep off-road goodness without actually sacrificing any livability. And that's what people have done for a long time now.
And a lot more size.
Yep. All right, number 4, this is an interesting one. It's the KAISER Jeep M715. What's that, Tommy? And why is it important?
Yeah, this is a funky one. It's, in terms of importance, probably not as important as some of the others, but the reason it's on here is because it has one of the coolest front ends of any Jeep ever. So this was a Jeep that was produced in the 1960s. It was a military version of the first generation Jeep Gladiator, which was a full-sized body-on-frame pickup truck Jeep sold from 62 all the way up through 1971. It had originally a Tornado inline 6-cylinder engine. The military version, they only made about 30,000 of them and replaced the M37. But it started the Gladiator name here in the US, if you got the civilian version, and it competed with GM and Ford in the large pickup truck class, which Jeep no longer does.
Yeah, and I just got back from SEMA, Tommy, and to this day you will see that kind of iconic front end of the old Gladiator on a lot of new Jeep Wranglers because people just love the look of that thing. So it's still extremely popular. I think they just nailed the look of it, and ever since then, those of you who love Wranglers but want to take it to the next level, this is the way to do it. And you can actually buy that front end and put it on a JK. I'm not sure it exists for a JL yet, but I'm sure it will.
I'm sure it will.
So number 3, Tommy, now we're getting to the top 3, of course, is the new JT, which is?
The new Gladiator. So this is the Wrangler-based mid-size truck.
Yeah, and why is that important? Well, because it's a Wrangler pickup.
Right.
Yeah, and you guys have been asking for it. Finally, Jeep decided to bring it back. And, you know, if you want that Jeep off-road goodness, but you want it to be more of a utilitarian vehicle, then it makes complete sense to have a pickup version of it. And let's face it, it really is a Wrangler with a bed, even though Jeep will say it's much more than that.
Yeah, for sure. It's the first Jeep pickup since the Comanche went away in 1992. Now our number 2 vehicle, speaking of Comanches and that basic platform, is the first generation Jeep Cherokee, the Jeep Cherokee XJ.
Yeah, the XJ is probably the most classic Jeep out there in terms of affordability, and that's why it's so important. It brought Jeeping to the masses, and tell them a bit about it, because they built a lot of them.
Yeah, so it was the best-selling Jeep ever made between 1984 and 2001. They sold roughly 2.9 million of the Cherokee XJs. And the reason it's so important is because, well, first of all, it was small. It was technically a unibody vehicle.
I would say it was exactly the right size.
Yeah, but it's small by modern standards. And what it single-handedly managed to do was convert people from their sedans and their coupes that would have had both a sedan and then some kind of off-roader into one cluster. So instead of going out and buying like a Ford Taurus, you could buy a Jeep Cherokee. It was almost as comfortable, a lot more usable. It would go in the snow. You didn't need a second vehicle. And it really, in my opinion, started the whole crossover trend we see today.
Yeah, and more importantly, you know, reliability isn't a word you think of when you think of Jeep, but yet because the Jeep Cherokee had the 4-liter straight 6, which I think on any list would be one of the top 10 engines ever produced.
Right.
It had a reputation, still has a reputation for being bulletproof. So you had an engine that would go forever, you had a chassis that was straightforward and simple, and you had a vehicle that was easy to mod. And you combine all those things with the fact that they built almost 3 million of them, and you've got a vehicle that is ubiquitous and everywhere, and it's still, to this day, the most affordable way you can take a Jeep off-road.
Yeah, it
I said almost said cheap because it is cheap, right? You could buy one for between, let's say, $3,000 on the low side to maybe $5,000, $7,000 on the high side, and take it off-road, and it doesn't, you know, burn huge holes in your pocket like a Wrangler would.
Yeah, solid axles, so super easy to mod, like you mentioned. Okay, here we go. Back into drive. Up it, no problem with a little bit of momentum. Yeah, just a great model. Now, our number 1 Jeep on our list.
You know what that is. You guys know what that is.
It's the first civilian model, the CJ2A, and this is a funny history. So once the Jeep returned from the battlefield, the company, which was owned by WILLYS at the time, started producing a variant of that, the CJ2A, and marketed it as an agri-Jeep, or essentially a farm vehicle. So this was built for farm or industrial areas or ranchers to use kind of like a side-by-side is used today. So they had all sorts of different PTOs or power takeoffs for the rear. Like they had it was like a Jeep trench if you wanted one that would dig trench. You could get a digger on the back. You could get lawnmower attachments. But it was a huge success. They sold over 215,000 of the 2As from 45 through 49, and it basically set the groundwork for what we know as the Jeep Wrangler.
Yeah, you know, it's also officially known as a flat fender Jeep, which to many purists is the most beautiful form of the Jeep, and it is the grandfather of every Jeep to this day.
Yeah, for sure.
In this video I said we would pick which one we would buy if it were our money. Which one would you buy? Pick one.
Which one I buy, or which one is the most
You
important?
bought a bunch of these, but which one would you actually, if you went out and
Yeah, it's
had to only buy one of these, which would it be?
like my buddy David Tracy Jalopnik. It has to be the Cherokee, the XJ, because it's just such a brilliant platform to mod. It's so easy to daily drive, and they're so ubiquitous. It's just the perfect Jeep.
Yeah, I'd be in the same boat, the XJ, or maybe the TJ if I wanted a Wrangler.
Yeah, I agree.
But either one of those you can't go wrong with. There's tons of aftermarket support for both of those, and you know they're in the sweet spot of the Jeep lineup right now. Well, guys, there you have it. I'm sure we've forgotten a bunch.
Oh, for sure. Let us know in the comment section below what you think the most important Jeep is, and as always, go back to TFL Car.
And TFL Jeep.
No, that's not a thing.
It's not a thing. It's not a thing. Maybe it should be a thing. And check out the latest news, views, and of course, real world reviews. See you guys next time. Ciao.